Welcome to Movie Summary. Today I'm going to explain an American horror film called Room 1408. Warning. Spoilers ahead. Enjoy and take care. The movie opens with a rainstorm. A car stops by a local lodge. A man, Mike Enslin, comes out and visits the lodge. He is an author of cheesy horror tour guide books. He travels from place to place, staying at supposedly haunted places and then writing summaries of them for his books. He is told about the history of the lodge and its hauntedness. Mike stays in the attic room, but it seems totally harmless. The room is a regular room and Mike falls asleep. The next morning Mike wakes up and heads to a book signing he is scheduled to attend in a small bookstore. Mike talks about his various books at the event, which is attended by 4 or 5 people. One of the attendees asks him if his experiences have led him to believe in ghosts. Mike says all this stuff is fantasy. A young girl walks up to him and places a book before him called The Long Road Home that he wrote. Not a horror book. The girl says she was genuinely touched and moved by the book. She asks him if it really happened. Mike says no. She asks him if he is ever going to write another book like it. Mike says that period is over now. After the book event, Mike goes for surfing. As he is surfing, he sees a plane flying over his head with a banner attached to it. As Mike tries to read it, he doesn't see the huge wave headed for him. The wave sends Mike reeling and he eventually washes up on the beach chalking water. Later Mike goes to the post office to pick up his mail and opens them up at a local diner. Most of them are advertisements for more supposedly haunted locations, but one of them is a postcard from the Dolphin Hotel in New York with a single warning message: don't enter 1408. Mike writes equals 13 on the card, the sum of the numbers, and comments clever. Mike calls the hotel and tells them he would like to make a reservation of room 1408. They tell him that it is unavailable. But Mike prepares to head for the Dolphin. He arrives at the Dolphin Hotel, eventually lead to meet the manager of the hotel, Gerald Olin. Olin tries to tell Mike about why he must not stay in room 1408. He offers Mike a bottle of bourbon. He then goes through the room's hideous history, and how dozens of people have killed themselves inside the room in all sorts of shocking manners. According to Mr. Olin, there have been 56 deaths, of which over 20 have been natural deaths. However, Enslin's determination to follow through wins out. Mike and Gerald go to the 14th floor on the elevator. Gerald warns him one last time to not go to 1408. Yet Mike continues to 1408 and opens the door with the key. The room looks like any regular modern hotel room. He walks in and shuts the door. He checks out the room, but there doesn't seem to be anything unusual. As time passes by, Mike goes to the windows to look out. As he looks out the window, he suddenly hears some weird noise of movement behind him. He turns around and sees 2 chocolates laid on his pillow from out of nowhere. He thinks this is some ruse by the hotel staff trying to scare him. Mike thinks whoever did the changes must still be in the room, but despite looking everywhere he cannot find anyone. A series of bizarre but trivial events starts occurring afterward. Noises, flashes, and other weird happenings seem to be going on. Then the heat in the room starts getting out of control. Mike is convinced this is all the doing of the hotel staff to make him leave the room. Mike calls the hotel operator to complain. He demands they send someone to fix it. A mechanic arrives but refuses to enter 1408. He just tells Mike how to fix the thermostat from afar. Mike fixes it and turns around to thank him, but he is already gone and the door closes. Later on, the clock radio turns on itself. The clock has begun a countdown from 60 minutes. He hears a high-pitched tingling and becomes deaf temporarily. His hand is crushed by the window. Then he went to the bathroom to wash the wounds, but suddenly the faucet runs from cool to hot water. The telephone rings, but the operator is different now, rude, telling Mike she will put the manager on, but the manager never comes. Mike makes a run for the door. Just as he opens the door, the key breaks. He then tries to unlock the door with a knife and unlocks, but the doorknob breaks. Mike goes back over to the bed and sees a specter of an old man emerge, goes over towards the window and jumps out. Then another female specter jumps out of the other window. Mike goes over to the window and looks out. Across the street he can see a man sitting in a building through a window. He tries to signal and scream to the man. The man gets up and signals back, but eventually he realizes this person is just mimicking his own actions. He takes the lamp he has been holding in his hand, trying to signal the other man, and holds it up to his face. The man across the street does the same, and Mike sees the man across the street is actually him. He then sees a figure with a knife approaching the mirror version of him from behind. Mike turns around and is attacked by the same hideous figure that eventually vanishes. Mike picks up the lamp and throws it out the window to get the attention of the people below, but the lamp just vanishes. The lampshade still has light coming out of it despite there being no lamp. He looks over at the bottle of bourbon and the chocolate on his bed. He realizes these could have been used to drug him and he is hallucinating. Suddenly the TV turns on. An old scene from his life plays. He sees himself playing with his wife Lily Ensslin and their daughter Katie. Puts his hand up to the TV, but the scene vanishes. Mike hears a baby crying from the next room. He knocks on the wall and asks for help, but no one responds. Instead, the baby's crying gets louder and louder, until it becomes absolutely deafening. Mike falls to the floor and throws a chair at the wall, and then the noise finally dissipates. Mike now realizes he must escape. He goes back over to the window, makes a comment into the voice recorder as he prepares to go out the window that if something were to happen to him, it was because he slipped and fell and it was an accident. It was not that the room drove him to kill himself. Mike goes out of the window and gets on the ledge to make his way across to the window of the next room over. However, as he keeps going further and looks down the ledge, there's no other windows except room 1408. He makes his way back from he came from, but as he tries to go back in, the ghost of the woman who jumped before startles him. She jumps again and vanishes before hitting the ground. Mike goes back to the room and sees the floor plan has changed, showing the only room 1408 is in the middle of the building. He also sees another scene from his past. Part of the room turns into a hospital room and Mike and his wife are talking about their daughter's health. Next, the walls start to bleed. Mike tries to calm himself by saying that this must all be a nightmare and tries to shock himself out of his dream by looking out of the window, but the room's elevation seems to rise dramatically and Mike falls back in fright. The room changes its physical appearance. The temperature has also dropped dramatically. Mike sees another scene from his past. His father sitting in a chair in a mental home. He walks up to his father, who smiles and tells Mike that soon Mike will be driven insane like him. Mike now realizes he must try and contact someone on the outside. He tries the wireless connection on his laptop and manages to get a video signal through to his wife Lily. He begs her to send the police to where he is. Suddenly the sprinkler system cuts on and short circuits Mike's laptop. Mike hopes he can crawl through the ducts to get out and manages to climb up. He sees more scenes from his life as he passes the air ducts of the rooms below. He suddenly finds himself pursued by a grotesque-looking old man who starts crawling after Mike. He kicks the old man's face, shattering it. Mike finally falls back down to room 1408. He finds room is now completely covered in snow. Mike walks back over to the floor plan, but it only shows 1408 and blackness all around it. He looks through the keyhole and sees just a wall. Mike burns the various articles in the room to keep warm. As he does, he witnesses more scenes from his past. Mike then sees a vision in the wall. It is Gerald Olin back in his office. Gerald begins talking to Mike. Mike is furious at him, but Gerald says he gave Mike every chance to pass on staying in 1408. He tells Mike that he should not have been so skeptical of ghosts. Mike tries to reach for Gerald to hit him, but he just finds himself punching a wall. Mike is finally ready to give up when he hears his wife on his laptop again contacting him. He runs over to it and tells her if she sent the police to 1408. His wife says the police are in 1408 and it is empty. Mike now realizes the full power of 1408. The room has now transported him into some kind of separate dimension from the reality. His wife says she is going to come there. But Mike tells her not to. Then Mike sees a new video image of him on the laptop telling his wife to come down to 1408. Mike begins screaming to the video of his wife on the laptop, but to no avail. After she logs off, the false Mike smiles and then winks at the real Mike. The room's paranormal activity reaches its pinnacle. One of the pictures, a scene of a ship in a violent storm, begins pouring water into the room. Soon the entire room is gone and Mike is trapped underwater. Above him, though, he sees a light being emitted from the surface. Mike swims towards it and realizes he is no longer in 1408. He is back on the beach from the beginning of the film. He looks up and sees the plane flying overhead, and this time he can read the message on it. It says to get great life insurance, call 31408. Mike eventually finds himself back on the beach where he washed up. Mike then comes to see his wife. He asks her if he is in New York, but she tells him he is in LA and never went to NY. But he suddenly sees a waitress who looks exactly like the suicidal ghost from 1408. Mike becomes flustered, but then he looks back over and it's not that woman. His wife suggests him to write about the experience. He researches the victims of 1408, but this time they are different and didn't die in 1408. Mike writes about how it was a hellish dream and brings his completed manuscript of the 1408 story to the post office, but the man at the counter is not the usual guy, but the bellboy he met earlier at the Dolphin. Mike turns around and sees some guys working on the wall behind him, but they too are workers from the Dolphin Hotel. Suddenly they all begin tearing down the walls of the post office, and behind them emerges room 1408. He keeps telling himself, "I was out." Mike's daughter appears before him. Mike doesn't believe this is the real Katie. She grabs Katie in his arms. However, suddenly Katie go limp. He looks at Katie only to find her slumped dead in his arms. The clock radio turns itself on. The body of his daughter crumbles before him into dust. Mike watches the last few moments of the hour pass on the clock. When the clock is over, Mike arises back in room 1408, back in normal. The clock has reset and has begun ticking back down from 60 minutes. The phone rings. He picks it up and asks, "Why don't you just kill me?" The same rude woman operator says, "Because all our guests enjoy free will, sir. You can either repeat this hour over and over forever, or you can take advantage of our express checkout." Mike then looks over to see a noose dangling above the bed. Mike sees himself disappear in a mirror and then two graves, his daughter's grave and Mike's grave, to be buried. Then in a mirror, Mike sees himself hanging through the mirror's image. Mike goes back to the desk and picks up a receiver. The operator says, "Are you ready to check out?" His answer is no, and he hangs up the phone. The telephone rings again. The operator says, "Your wife will be here soon and I will be sure to send her right up. Just remember there is no escape." Mike tells the operator that the room will not have her. He then says that if he is going down, then he is going to be sure that room 1408 joins him. Mike picks up the bottle of bourbon, which is now full again, and puts a string into it. He lights the string and then throws it at the wall. The room begins to erupt in flames. Some ways away, Lily is in a cab. She jumps out of the cab and runs to the hotel and sees the fire. Guests are storming out. Lily runs up to the firemen and begs them to help her husband. Meanwhile, Mike back in 1408, smiling and laughing, knowing he has beat the room even if this means his death. He crawls under a table as the room is engulfed in flames around him. He is happy to see the room destroyed as he dies. During Enselin's funeral, Olin approaches Lily and unsuccessfully attempts to give her a box of Enselin's possessions, including the tape recorder. Going back to his car, Olin listens to the recording in his car, becoming visibly upset when he hears Katie's voice on the tape. He looks in the car mirror and imagines seeing a glimpse of Enselin's burnt corpse in the backseat. Having heard and seen enough, Olin places the tape recorder back in the box and drives off. The film ends at the gutted room, with an apparition of Enselin looking out the window and smoking a cigarette. He hears his daughter calling his name, and disappears as he walks towards the room's door. Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.